Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work. Welcome to KIMEcast. Tony Mikla, Russ Dunning. All right, so let's talk about this, Russ, about this idea of human performance, individual performance, if you will, like strength, power, speed, and the dichotomy of that with sports performance as on a team. If you're winning, what does it take to win? What does it take to play? What does it take to compete? And what goes into that over the course of a season, and the effect that it has on the individual player and the individual player's performance. Right? It's quite a continuum.
Yeah, I was talking with Coach Jay Nassianalis. Coach Jay is both an ATC and a performance coach, so a weightlifting coach, weight room trainer, and coaches elite teams, individuals. I mean, he's really coached personally a lot of D1 basketball and D1 football athletes.
He does some MMA guys too, right?
Yeah. He's worked with some of the best UFC fighters in the world. So he has a really nice look at what it takes to train individuals at a teenager level, see their development, be a part of the age 14 to age 18 development, which I think is magical. And very important for a person to see.
Yeah, I think this is the last frontier of development.
The meat of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Working from age 12 to 18
that's where the meat is. That's where
that's really set the foundations.
You set the foundation for all great things. And so he's been a part of that, seen that, done that for his entire career. And he made a comment to me today saying that he notices more and more as he's gotten better with measuring performance, defined by speed, power, and strength. He's seen those metrics downgrade when a lot of his athletes go off to a D1 program, albeit many different sports. And then they come back 6 months, 9 months later, or 12 months later, say, some type of off-season work with him, and he's measured their performance, and it's downgraded. It's gone down by, say, 10%. And that's been an unfortunate observation. Now, it's a great opportunity for him to redevelop that, but that's an observation.
Did he find it was pretty short postseason period? It's basketball for some of these guys, so we're kind of 3 or 4 months post at this point, and they're still down.
I don't know. Is that clear? I think this is something to study.
Just observation.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we know that as you go through the season, you're going to see this, this degradation, if you will. You're going to get worse. I mean, this is the biggest thing in pro sports that's hard. Is all right, you go into the season, say it's the NFL, you go into the season in August, and no one wants to play in the preseason because it's 18 games long, 18 weeks long. Whole goal is play good at the end of the season, so you don't want to you don't want to do too much up front, and you want to kind of save your time, only do just enough to win, so you can be best in the playoffs versus beat up, tired, exhausted. I mean, we see it from a team standpoint. The healthy team wins.
Yes,
you see the NBA right now. This is so overly evident. It's crazy. If you look at the Warriors, for example. I think the Warriors were up 3-1, or they're definitely up 2-1. I think they were up 3-1. Ended up losing that series when Steph went out with the hamstring. Mm-hmm. Who I saw, by the way, this weekend. We were at the volleyball tournament together. It was pretty cool. He was there with his daughter and my daughter at the volleyball tournament, so we were on the same bleachers. Yeah, it's great.
Wow.
Yeah. Super good dude. His whole family's good to see. And then, but the Cavaliers were in the same situation. Cleveland was, the best team in the league by far this season. Maybe not by far. Oklahoma City's been very good too, but Cleveland was fantastic. And then they just lost 2 or 3 of their best guys right in the playoffs and just out right away. So we see. I mean, winning teams have healthy people to play through the playoffs and play at the end.
With recognizing that a lot of the important features that make us perform at a high level, they degrade over time. Yep. But then what goes up? So there has to be I think a seesaw. On one side of the seesaw, you have performance metrics, tendon health, muscular strength, the nervous system, all these amazing things that we can measure. I mean, that's what the Olympics measures, is these momentary performance abilities of what we can do athletically. And the other side of the seesaw might be a list of sport IQ, conditioning, maybe reaction, but less so of your physical reaction, maybe more of your brain reaction. Mm-hmm. So I think your brain gets a lot sharper through season. I think you get more conditioned in the sport by playing the sport over and over and over. And what does conditioned mean? I think you can define that by work capacity of the tissue, that your heart gets better at pumping blood, your body gets more oxygenated with enhanced mitochondria. You have some attributes that allow you to play the sport over and over and over. I think what I've seen in the MMA community and definitely in the football community is the body will start creating some armor on the outsides of it. So the tissue gets literally thicker. Your joints might get stiffer to protect you. There's some protective attributes that are designed after repeat hits.
Yeah.
So you have on the other side of the seesaw, this conditioning, sport IQ, body armor. So, but then you have, then where's the sweet spot lie? And because I don't think you can have a human that has it all every game throughout the season and at the end. Like, I don't think that's the case. And we've seen the best of the best, get injured. And I've appreciated this more and more, having my own kids go through sports, that if you're always playing the sport, yeah, your sport IQ gets better. And yeah, you might get more conditioned in the sport, but there is a trade-off. And now with measuring teams, I can now measure a team of a same cohort. That means the same sport, same sex, same age. But one group is a multi-sport athlete that plays the sport a lot through the year, and the other cohort is a single sport athlete that only plays the sport 4 times a week, every week of the year. And hands down, the multi-sport that plays less of the sport by far is more athletic. Now, I've only tested a handful of teams that show that, and I can't wait to do that ad nauseum.
Yeah.
Because that to me is the exact trade-off. If you want to elevate sport IQ and sport conditioning in the moment, there is always a trade-off.
Well, that's the debate. I think that's the huge debate. And like, for me at least in sports, like, do I play multiple sports? Do you have your kids play multiple sports to develop them properly? So a multi-sport athlete is always more athletic. So, but is that because the best athlete plays multiple sports, or does being multi-sport make them a better athlete? Right? I mean, I think it's really interesting to watch as now that we're both of us in these developmental ages with our kids and being like actually on the courts, on the fields, watching these kids grow up for the last 4 or 5 years together. It's really interesting to watch kids that really excelled like 4 or 5 years ago, and were like early bloomers, are now struggling in many ways. From a performance standpoint, not quite as fast or not bigger and stronger than the ones that have caught up, and you're starting to see kids that are just unbelievably athletic. Like, there's some amazing athletes that can almost like whatever they do, they can
pick it up and have success.
Yeah, they're just good at it. It's crazy. And then you got other ones that are really, really kind of flourishing a little bit later, and coming into their own a little bit more, and competing and doing well that they weren't even on we're on the playing field, a couple years ago. So it's interesting to watch the different types. But I think it's really, if you've got an athlete, like as a genetic athlete, I think the conversation's like really easy. Obviously, play multiple sports and really protect the athlete and just let it be. You don't have to be great at 12, But I also think that if you don't have a great athlete, then I think you have to like start developing all of these components.
A super compensator. If you don't have a super compensator, then it is important to do some strength work.
You got to be stronger. You got to work on conditioning
and run fast.
And you got to work on sport IQ.
Like how often you go to a practice and no one sprints 100%?
Yeah,
that's a thing. It's like you can do a lot of practices at a very like medium pace. So if you ever sprint 100%, do you ever really get faster?
Yeah,
playing the sport.
But you got to play the sport enough to get your sport IQ up, to learn the sport, learn the strategy, so that you can win with strategy, so that you can't just win with speed. Even if you go work on speed and addition, you may not win that way. So I think there's another dichotomy is like, were you athletic already and you can just walk in and play any sport because you're an athlete? Or are you becoming more athletic because you're learning different sports? Does playing football help you in lacrosse? Or another similar sport would be like water polo. Like, those 3 sports have a very similar like team spacing, team design. Soccer is very similar as well. Team spacing, design, trying to get to the goal as a team and kind of break down a defensive unit. So you can use sport IQ across the board there and apply it multiple ways. And we always hear people say like later on in life, like, yeah, I'm glad I played multiple sports. It made me better. Those are always people that are pretty good athletes.
Well, I think I've read quite a few posts by Eric Cressy, who I think is extremely passionate on this topic. And he'll say that you can pick up sports skill later on.
Yeah.
But during the peak ages of growth, you should be ballistically moving athletically to maximize the return.
We have seen that. There's a lot of evidence around that.
Yeah.
I mean, Greg Rose put a lot of that out too with TPI, that there's speed windows. There's windows of time in youth development. So one of the windows is between the ages of 7 and 9, and the next window is between the ages of 12 and 14, are your windows to really develop speed and power. So one of them, usually the speed window is a little earlier and the power window is a little bit later one. With girls, it's about 1 year earlier than it is with the boys for maturity reasons.
I think these windows, I would love to explore that concept
You saw
more.
this, didn't you see this? I mean, Aria's like
I see
a
it,
perfect example of this.
I see it, but I'm not sure I understand like the buckets. So case in point, Jocelyn, one of our PTs, hit me up yesterday and she goes, I'm so excited. I got the opportunity to now test quite a few track and field athletes that are also multi-sport, because if you get ages of 8 to 14 track and field, they're all playing different sports. And so she was asking, what about like the 5th and 6th graders that are a bit too small for the belt squat? What's our athlete battery look like? Do we care about strength for a prepubescent? They haven't quite hit like the big curve that, a 12-year-old girl will get or a 13 or 14-year-old boy will get. And then I thought, like, well, what about like jumping them and then seeing their force at their minimum displacement and dividing that by their body weight to get a kind of an idea. It's like a pseudo measure of like, are you making good use of your power? And if you meet a certain threshold, I think for those 5th graders, 4th graders, all you do is just challenge them with speed and run and jump and do fun things. And that might be all you need to do for that 5th and 6th grader. But if it's under a certain threshold, maybe it's just like a very mid-level adapter. Then if they want the path to, being a really good high school athlete, that is the 6th grader that needs to do a lot more strength training. And I think maybe parents less so, but coaches definitely get a good feel of this. They get a good feel of like, yeah, you're pretty good at the sport, but I really need you to get stronger. They get a feel of it. I like to measure that and have a threshold for that feel. Yeah. So that way we have a little more of a measure like, hey, you're kind of not making good use of your body. I need you to get stronger so that you can make good use of your body. I think we do that just with the jump. Have the kid jump. It's less about the height. It's more about their force application. I think it'd be a really cool thing to look at so that we help that middle school. Do you just run and jump? Or like, no, you 6th grader, you need to do strength training. Even though you're kind of young to do a belt squat,
Yeah. I mean, we know that like the calisthenic stuff is effective, right? I mean, this has really stood the test of time. Can you do pull-ups? Can you do a push-up? Can you jump high? I mean, the only other way to squat it from a test standpoint would be like a giant step up or like a pistol squat to look at a one-legged thing.
Sure.
But it's really, a lot of the young people aren't really doing a pistol squat at that age. Like they just don't have the coordination and and like
or the little
mass.
giraffe, their, balance is still.
We know they don't have the strength. They're kind of springy and they can jump, but they don't have the true strength, Some do. And obviously they have a distinct advantage on the field. You could see that usually.
Well, that's the thing is I think some athletes can just play the sport and get very powerful playing the sport. Yeah. And there's probably a bulk of them that like, multi-sport great, but you also have to do strength training. And, to try and tease that out, I think it'd be really good. To try, I almost like use the phrase, bring the middies up. I don't mean to be mean about it, but like just bring the mid-level and let's help them become elite. Because sometimes the elite can just play the damn sport and be awesome. But I think the mid-level can be awesome as well.
Yeah.
They just need a little more work in that window.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's interesting. It's so funny to hear from the kid's perspective too. Like my son's super been passionate about like training and lifting and stuff, and he's been getting after it for the last 2 years now. And he takes great pride in like what he's built and how much stronger he's become and like his success. And we've had some new guys come in and join our group that's training, and they're his friends and such that he knows. And then one kid's a really good athlete. And he hasn't been training very long, but he's always been a very good athlete. So he comes in and like immediately kind of picks up almost the same place that my son's at, who's worked his tail off to get there. And he's so mad. He's like, Dad, so you're saying that how is he so strong already? I was like, well, he's a great athlete and he works hard. He's a little more mature, so he's kind of already built a little bit. And I was like, and he puts on muscle faster. Like his body adapts faster than yours does. And that's normal that you're going to see this variation. And he was so mad. He's like, so you're saying that I could work super hard for like months, and I would make this much improvement, and that guy can work super hard for like 2 weeks and make the same improvement. And I'm like, yep. That's what I'm saying. The adaptation curve is different based on the person. He's like, that sucks, bro. I'm like, yeah, no matter how hard you work, sometimes you still cannot outwork like a great athlete, a great genetic, system.
But I think it's for that exact reason. When we try and push kids to playing sports, we need to find the right level of play that maximizes their connection, social connection, that makes them try hard, that they get some wins and some losses. It is not about, let's see, how far we can go with this thing. It's about maximizing your potential.
Oh yeah, it's about development.
So, but why is it that 95% of parents don't understand that?
Oh, it's great. I came across this the other day. So a good buddy, Richard Jefferson, as an Arizona alumni with me, we were good friends at school, and Channing Frye, both of them were teammates with me at Arizona, and they have this podcast together. They played with Cleveland together at the Cavs, and so they have this podcast together. It's I don't know what they call it, but anyways. But Richard was on there, and he's like, I pulled my kid out of AAU. He goes, it is so frustrating to watch AAU. He goes, all they do is full court press. All they do is sprint, just so the coach can say that they went 42-9 at the end of the season and dominated. He goes, nobody got better. No one's improving. No one's working on any skills. You're just like dominating to get this record. He goes, but no one got better during the whole season. He goes, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. He could pull my kid out of it.
Yeah.
I was like, well, easy decision, Rich, when you're a McDonald's All-American and 6'9", and your kid's probably going to be a beast. It's easy to just pick and choose what you're a part of. But I think it's a big challenge for parents is to finding the right coach, finding this developmental process. I mean, to really be developmental. Yeah. You're so rewarded for winning in this country that it can turn south in a hurry. So we see it in baseball with elbows and shoulders. We talked about that in the last podcast with Evan about the stuff we see. I mean, just overuse because you're a good player. You get played more. You do more stuff. We see it in soccer. The best players on the field all the time. See it in hoops. Best players always on the field. I mean,
well, I'm a reference my favorite researcher of all time. So I got to meet him one day at some kind of conference if he's still alive. His name's Mihail Csikszentmihalyi. Took me a lot to learn that name. So he wrote the book Flow, and what he'll say is the flow state, which is basically he'll say is the definition of life. What we all want in life is fulfillment. We don't want happiness unless you're a narcissist. We want fulfillment, and fulfillment comes in the flow state. And I had a coach tell me quite simply what his version of the flow state was. About a third of the time they should win, a third of the time they should lose, and a third of the time it's a toss-up. You're not sure where it's going to go. That's a sweet spot. And that coach said it so beautifully. His name was Coach Ty Downs, great soccer coach in the area. And that's it. Because if you're getting your ass beat each time, you should feel anxious because you're in a state where you're lacking a skill set. Could be performance skill set, could be sport IQ, whatever. You're lacking certain skills. That's why you feel a lot of anxiety, and that's a losing state. If you're just crushing every team over and over, now you're getting bored. Both an anxious state and a boredom state are not great. No one really wants to be bored. No one wants to be anxious. We want to find the flow state of fulfillment, and that means it's kind of a toss-up. We might win, we might lose, not sure. Yeah. That's a great spot to be in. Yeah. So wherever your athlete, whether you're coach, parent, PT, sport med, whatever it is, like you got to find that, like that's a sweet spot that we should all be seeking. Yeah. Not higher is better. Find that spot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, like being on these different teams. Like we just finished the basketball season and the team finished like 12-1, and we were a good team, but we all felt like we didn't play that much competition, as parents. And it was very, the parents are like, man, I wish like the boys had like, they're not developing as much because they're not playing against hard, more challenging opponents, which is true. Like we could have definitely played more challenging teams and gotten blasted, or had at least more of a competitive game, which everybody gets better from. If you're playing in competition, everything gets better. So it's interesting. Like in the moment, everybody wants to win, but then when they get back and looking back, they're like, it would have been better if we were like 6-6 as opposed to 12-1 or whatever.
Which is development. I think when people reference pros, the pros want to crush and win because you're already at the elite. They've already developed. If you're a professional, by definition, you've developed, and now you're just purely performing. But from ages of 5 to 20, we're development.
Absolutely. So back to this main topic we started off with here was about the dichotomy of like, if you're training, your performance is going up. And then as you go and compete for the sport, or these example was the kids went off to D1 school and they played their season, et cetera, and came back in a worse off state. I think it's interesting, like, and to your point, like maybe they go there and as they most of these were team sport athletes that we've been talking about. So they go there and they're getting better sport IQ, they're learning the strategy of the game, learning how to play together, all of team chemistry, all that stuff's massive in winning in those environments. I wonder what they would look like with like a track athlete or somebody like a gymnast who's not competing in like a team environment and they're individually performing. I wonder if we see that same type of drop off. I think the track is like one of the most challenging sports, to improve on, because it's truly everything you're doing is measuring like your own performance, you against the earth. How fast can I run? How far can I throw? How high can I jump? It's really all it's about. And it's just measurements. It's like what we do every day in the clinic, like on steroids. It's just that's the thing.
And so, I think those coaches are forced to live with off seasons.
Yeah,
they have to,
and they're forced to focus on limiting factors.
Yeah, because if you just ran someone and raced them every single week, you cannot keep getting better. The immune system won't let you.
Yeah.
At one point, you're like, we're not getting any better. And the coach is then forced to think, well, clearly just running fast is not getting me faster. I got to do something different. You have to develop. So I think you learn really quickly, and off season is needed to get better.
Yeah. You go work on your weaknesses and you come back and then you reintegrate and put it back in. But there's no defense in those sports.
Yeah.
And there's very little strategy as far as like trying to beat the other team.
Yeah, the sport IQ is
it's really just human performance, but it's interesting when you're trying to maximize human performance, you really have to compromise.
Yeah,
like
there's no reaction.
Stuff.
There's probably very little to say about. I guess there is conditioning. You kind of get better through. There is conditioning. Maybe we can talk about that. But yeah, the sport IQ and the reaction and the body armor. I'm not so sure if that's like as much of a thing.
You learn how much you have to take care of your body though when you're in an individual sport, like as a gymnast or a track athlete. The smallest injury, right, like a little ankle sprain or wrist thing or what it could be, just the slightest amount of pain. All of a sudden, you realize your performance like drops tremendously.
Your feedback is very sharp on performance.
Yes.
Whereas if you're a basketball athlete and say you're a little bit slower, you can't jump quite as high, but you made more 3-pointers, you'll call that a win.
But you see this.
You wouldn't notice.
You see this in basketball all the time. Like a guy like literally rolls his ankle, goes down the ground, and literally limps for 3 to 5 minutes. And they go back to the locker room. Maybe he comes back. Whatever happens, but they come back and then they play. So we all know that athletes not at 100%. But they still, at 85, 90%, 70%, whatever it is, they're better than most, and so they're still effective. That would never, ever happen in track.
No.
Or gymnastics. Well, in gymnastics it happens, but it's really selective. They're really, really hesitant.
Yeah.
Even like, I think Simone was hurt this last year, and they really, really protect them. They don't let them compete in certain things. They really protect them.
Yeah.
But in track, that would never happen.
Yeah.
Like if you sprain something, you're just done for the whole
or
meet.
swim,
Yeah.
My shoulder's not operating really well. You're
out.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be 0.2 of a second slower and you're probably going to be off the podium.
Yeah.
Like you're just not even worth running.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great understanding of what it really means to be effective in the sport. And you can have less performance as in speed, power, strength and be really effective. But I think the unfortunate thing, going back to the dichotomy or the seesaw effect, is that to get sport conditioned and to build IQ, it takes a lot of reps. And those reps and volume on the body, they take away from your ability to recover. They take away from your ability to perform speed, power, and strength. And I think that's the unfortunate dichotomy is it's really hard to get lots of reps with playing, lots of reps to build sport conditioning, and to be the most powerful, and to be the fastest and the strongest all in the same moment. That might not be the thing. That probably isn't a thing. And so they have to make trade-offs. And the other feature is, the Super Bowl is never in the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
So, there's that.
So I think you want to talk about conditioning, just to kind of add a layer to this. I think it's critical, especially in all of the sports, certainly in the team sports, but same thing with the individual ones as well, like wrestling and MMA. Conditioning might be the majority of the battle.
Yeah. But
getting yourself into shape where you can compete or maintain a level of play throughout the entire duration. Like when MMA changed the rules from like the wrestling had been 3 minutes, boxing had been 3 minutes around for a century, forever. And then all of a sudden they switched it to 5-minute rounds.
Oh gosh.
I know when you were training these guys, it's like, woo, like,
yeah.
I mean, that's almost double.
Yeah.
And 3 minutes is, anyone who's wrestled is like 3 minutes is exhausting.
Yeah. I mean, you just told a 400-meter sprinter, you're now doing an 800.
Yeah.
Like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
That can't mean I can't do
at the same speed.
Yeah.
Which is impossible.
Yeah. Right. That's right. It's an impossible situation.
But it was, so the whole goal of that conditioning, right, is it creates fatigue moments, which creates big hits, right? Creates big opportunities. The guy gets tired and then gets kicked in the head, and everybody wants to see that. So, and
probably the same thing with every sport. The action happens when people get tired and start making mistakes.
And that's why you see people go on runs, right? Third quarter, fourth quarter. Coaches talk about it a lot, and a lot of times as a fan, I think you don't necessarily see it, and as a player, sometimes you don't really recognize it's happening. But you can see towards the end of the game, there is levels of fatigue that come in, and then you're just a step slow, and then you get taken advantage of, and then you start to see teams kind of spread their margin of victory. So the conditioning element is massive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is where I think it gets interesting performance-wise. The fastest 100-meter sprinter will never be the same as the fastest 800. So, 10 seconds, 45 seconds. They'll never be the same. Did I do that math right?
800's more than that. 400's
90 seconds.
Yeah, that's about 150.
So because the human body cannot do both of those at an elite level.
Yeah.
So now let's go back to basketball. What do you prize more? The person that can jump 40 inches and do a slam dunk from the free throw line, that can fly in the air, or the person that can perform at the end of the fourth quarter the same as the end of the first quarter? And so then it's kind of like, which position?
Yes.
Or are they a shooter? And so really you're maximizing the strengths, but let's also understand we develop to do this.
Yes.
So what are we developing toward, and what's prized in the activity?
Yep. 100%. Makes you think of this. There's kind of a change happening in like the way people are approaching like just development period, like for school, like the conversation of going to school is like a big one right now. Do you go to college? Do you not go to college? Is it worth it? All this stuff. And the idea is now I've heard a lot more advice about that. This one guy was talking about, like, people say, well, find something you're passionate about, because you find something you're passionate about, then you're going to really want to excel at it, and you have a lot of fun with it, and it's something you're going to get better at, and you can enjoy your life with it and stuff. And his concept was like, no, that's not great advice. You can be passionate about it, but that might end up being just a hobby for you. You don't want to be passionate about something, not make any money, or not be successful at it. He's like, find something you're good at. What are you talented at? Like, what are your natural talents and your natural skills? And then what can you leverage with those talents and skills to create your future? And that should determine kind of like what direction you go.
To create value.
Yeah. And then once you find your talent and your passion, you kind of see where they merge. And that's where you want to, that's like your sweet spot. That's where you want to spend your time.
And usually it's fun.
Yeah.
You get into a flow state. It fulfills you. So that fulfills the passion part.
Exactly. It all comes together. And the passion can be a little bit sideways. You could also have a passion for something else that you're deeply passionate about that is your hobby, and that's okay. But you're really leveraging your talents to be most successful. But I think in sports, it's the same idea. It's what are you really, really, really good at, is what you were just saying. Like, some people are really good shooter in basketball. Some people are much more conditioned, like maybe they call it like the enforcer, where you're just always on the court, but you're strong, you hold a position, no one's going to beat you down, And then you've got your really high-level athlete, really electric, high flyer. And you have to play those people differently. Like, if you're really coaching to like human performance in the nervous system, you have to know that you've got to rest those high flyer people. They can only go in spurts. They're like sprinters. Yeah. Go real heavy and then back it off. Heavy and back it off. Your guy that's out there, it's just like a brick, and he just can go all day long, and he's just rock solid. I mean, you can leave him out there for the whole game because his performance doesn't really fluctuate that much based on his conditioning. I
think these are natural attributes of the human system, but I think what I really love about our performance continuum, it's a buckets. We call it the fill the bucket mentality. But in our continuum of appreciating motion, stability, strength, speed, and power, in that order more or less, is that we've kind of set a threshold. Hey, every athlete should be able to do this. I think that threshold's nice because it kind of makes certain they don't have a flat tire out there. I think the flat tire concept is also quite nice. If you're amazingly powerful, very, very fast and quick, but horrible conditioning, That's just not okay.
Yeah.
You're not going to be good at pretty much anything. You can't even do a 100-meter sprint because you get too tired by the third sprint. You can't even train effectively. So there's always like a baseline of each one of our performance buckets to fill. So you kind of want to fill the bucket, that's, I think, a big part of what our athlete battery does is let's see if you have a flat tire anywhere. Okay. So if we can fill the threshold of speed, power, strength, conditioning, stability, motor control, that covers quite the list. And hopefully not be in any pain. And have good recovery. The list goes on. I apologize. So, but if we can fill that bucket, now we say, all right, what do you naturally excel at within these buckets? And then we can find a sport, an activity, a position that you really get to flex into, and you're probably gonna have a good time doing it because it's really fun to flex into something that you're good at. So I think that's really important so that you don't look at the big, burly, 250-pounder that's super strong and say, that's okay, you're so big and strong, you don't need to do a pull-up nor run a half mile. Like, no, we all should be able to own our body weight. We all should be able to have a certain baseline of conditioning. So the baseline is, I think, really critical for all parents and coaches to understand of helping your young athlete and for the athletes themselves. Understand where that baseline threshold is. And then who sets that? Well, that's what I think we're trying to find. We're trying to find those baselines for safety, but they also should apply for performance.
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and brought Chris Rounds on the show. So if you check out the podcast with Chris Rounds from a couple weeks ago, if you guys are interested in this topic, and we talked a lot about this concept of what's the baseline, like what is the person good at, and then how can we load them safely and effectively, and then we don't have to like be a hero in the weight room, but yet these guys are already like tremendous athletes. They already have these skill sets. What can we bring to the table to kind of balance it out? So it's a really good talk about strategic programming around that concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Love it.
All right, so let's switch gears a little bit here and into more of the development of like individuals and people. One thing in our company at KIME we've been looking at is reestablishing our education system, honing it in, improving it as we've been growing and bringing on more and more new team members in different departments. It's always about how do we grow, how do we help people develop to the best of their ability, help reach their potential with education and bringing them not only on board to what we do, but helping them become better so they thrive as a person, thrive as an individual, find their own autonomy, and really have success. So the debate always around this for us is, do we teach a recipe or a specific strategy or a protocol, if you will, is kind of the language that in our field is like, oh, you're just going to do protocol-based stuff. Anyone can do that. It's kind of very, very basic. But there is a lot of science and there's a lot of reason behind why that stuff is there and why it's written and why it's good. And it gives everybody kind of a foundation. So there's one style is to go more recipe oriented or protocol oriented, and then another maybe style or type of development be to more teach principles and more principle based learning. And at the end of the day, the question comes down for us is like, are those different, or can they be used together to mesh together? Because we feel like we need a bit of both to really get the most out of people.
Yeah, and like, let's say specifically, if you came into me and your Achilles tendon hurt, I could just say, I'm gonna put you on Achilles tendon protocol, and you're gonna do slow tempo calf raises for a minute times 3 times. Preceding is a load of collagen and vitamin C. So take collagen and vitamin C, 30 minutes later, go ahead and do some calf raises, 3 times 1 minute, very, very, very slow. Go through mid-range so you don't do a maximal stretch, but it has to be very slow reps. And I might say, this is an Achilles tendon rebuilding protocol.
Yeah, and it works. It's somewhat guaranteed to work. It's definitely based on science.
Yeah, and I didn't even look at your movement. I didn't even look at your big toe. I barely, maybe saw it was a little swollen. Run a recipe. Yeah. The crazy thing is probably 60, 78% of the time, that'll work just fine.
Yeah. But there's no input in that situation. It's like, well, why did you develop the Achilles tendon in the first place?
There's no why.
Yeah. And why is it there? How long has it been there? Yeah. Why is it still there?
Yeah. Versus I could look in the science of your ankle joint, or the science of your fascial line, or the science of your motor control through your gait pattern, or the science of maybe your tendon's a little bit unhealthy because of a nutritional deficit or hormonal change or this time of your life. So the principle discussion, the science discussion can go quite deep and could span all different aspects of the human condition.
Yep. And it explains for a lot of the variability. Because even if we do have a recipe or a protocol that we follow, like I wouldn't really change that a ton. Like that's still going to be the root of what I would recommend someone to do it in this space of my career. It'd be like, yeah, take collagen 30 to 45 minutes before, make sure you have vitamin C with it so your body can absorb it the most. And then you have to do something that requires your leg to like hold strong positions for 5 to 10 minutes. So we would call it eccentric, call it isometric. I really don't care. Just make sure that thing's under load, at least body weight load if it's appropriate for that period of time, And really anything goes. I really don't care what exercise you choose. It doesn't really matter. But what does matter is like how you ended up in that state. So once we have the tendon better and it's actually starting to get stronger and it makes the chemical and scientific change we want to make so it can hold you and doesn't hurt anymore, then the question becomes, well, why did it become vulnerable in the first place? Was it because of a nutritional deficit? Was it because of an injury? Was it because biomechanically you move really dysfunctionally and you're putting undue stress on that, so eventually it's starting to wear, starting to complain about that wear and tear? And that's more of that principle-based learning is like move well is a key principle for us, is move well and then move often. But if the biomechanics are poor, then we need to address that before we just start moving more often.
Well, I think I really love first principle learning. I love the idea of it. I'm a philosophy major in college, so that just comes to my wheelhouse, I guess.
You are?
I was philosophy double major with engineering. I had to make sure I get some reading in with all the math. But I think when people come out of grad school, they might feel like they got a lot of science. Yeah. But I don't think that school has enough time to go as deep as they could. For instance, there should be a class entirely for fascia, another class entirely for mitochondria, another class entirely for the heart, just for the heart, not even the conditioning of the cell and the muscle. And clearly, if we had this approach, it would take like 10 years to become a physical therapist, which is inappropriate.
I think that's an interesting concept, actually. So I think my undergrad was extremely science heavy. It was human physiology, so not philosophy. Although sociology was maybe one of my favorite classes I had to take, just study of people and we're interacting together. But human physiology. But we studied like cellular level stuff unbelievably deep in undergrad. And at that time, none of us had any idea how this would apply or if it mattered or anything else. We got into some exercise phys, which is always cool, and you got to get some perspective of how things might work. You get the Krebs cycle and all the metabolic stuff, and you're like, oh, this is cool, I guess, but you still don't get how it interacts with like real people, real life. And then in grad school, like the dive on anatomy was like for PT school, the dive into anatomy was like unbelievably deep. And then we just evaluated the body. Yeah. But it really didn't talk. Neuroscience was by far the most in-depth because I had no touch of that previously. Yeah. And all the neurology and how the body works and motor control, that was the science, but there's very little cell biology. Yeah. Which now, you look at the things that we're doing, to your point, fascia or muscle training, the cellular biology of what's going on is actually what moves the needle. Yeah. That's the best science we should be relying on as a coach, as a strength coach, as a PT. Yeah. It's like what's going on with the
it's either cellular re-engineering or the nervous system retraining.
That's it.
It's like and if you dive deep in the science of myelin and motor control and tetanus contraction to like do something and how does that synergistically move through all the muscles to coordinate behavior. I mean, it's like there's a lot there. And so the problem is we can't train someone for 10 years and then on the 11th year, okay, here's your first patient. We're kind of all practicing medicine. And what are you practicing? Well, hopefully you have a lot of principles and you're kind of reminded of all these principles. And then you're also throwing some recipes in the mix. In reality, I think the better chef really has like 1,000 or more recipes. Yeah. Whereas the less chef only has like 10.
Yep. Yeah. So I think you have to have that recipe piece as kind of as a cornerstone to the process where there's a guide, there's a process to follow, there's an outline, if you will, of like, this is what works best. This is what we've seen be effective over the years. This is what the science shows, this is what the research shows, all of that kind of stuff. Really, really fundamental. I know for me, it was huge in my start of my career to just give me an idea and plans of how the body heals. But then I went back, as you kind of get through that process, you kind of become more of an expert of like, okay, well, what if people don't follow it exactly? Why did this person go so fast? Why is this person so much slower? Even though it was the same plan or the same recipe.
Yeah.
Then you start asking all those kinds of what questions. That takes you back to more of the basic principles of like, all right, what's going on with the cells? What's going on with their conditioning? How healthy were they when they started the process versus somebody else who wasn't as healthy?
They have 200 mitochondria. They have 2,000 mitochondria in every cell, the trillion makeup that they have. Going deeper into the why, I think, is the big journey for a clinician. It takes years and years of asking, I wonder why that worked, and I wonder why that didn't, and I wonder why it's working now. And frankly, applying the recipe without knowing the exact why, you can help a lot of people. And if you keep asking why, you'll slowly apply those principles to the recipes, and then your book grows. Because in reality, sometimes you evaluate someone, and you might find 3 issues, and you can't quite make sense of them all, because it takes a kinetic linking genius to make sense of them all. And it's okay to say, you know what, we got these 3 problems. I think this is your biggest problem, but you got these other 2. How about let's work on these and be patient with your body as it enhances this. And that's like a graceful way of saying, I don't know why they all matter, but I know this is what I'm finding, and this is what you are in control of. Most important, you are now in control of improving these qualities. So we don't have to be this mastermind genius to actually help people.
No, well, I think to become a mastermind genius, I think a lot of it comes down to starting off with consistency. Like having a recipe is a really good idea to have like, this is my program, this is my flow. So when you come in with Achilles tendonitis, if I do the same thing 10 times to 10 different people, I'm going to learn that works really well, or I'm going to learn that it doesn't.
Yes.
And either way, I've improved tremendously.
Yeah, when I have an extension bias person and they can't flex forward, and if I have that person 3 times that day, I'm going to have my students witness me do half rolls, cat cows, thread the damn needle, and how do you feel? Take a walk. Oh, I forgot to open up your anterior line, do a Thomas stretch. And they're going to say, like, you just do the same shit for all your back pain patients? I say, like, well, they can all extend really well. They just can't flex. So I happened to get 3 people that really fit that list. So I did this basic routine. And then they're going to tell me if they need more. Yeah. Because if it improved, great. What more do you want? It improved.
Right.
If it didn't improve, which is the whole point of testing and retesting, did I miss something? And I probably did.
Yep.
I should look closer.
Yeah, you've got to have a flow. So it was ingrained in me, really, like in school, like in grad school, not to use a protocol. They were really adamant not to teach protocols, not to like give you references to doing protocols. This was at the onset of the internet. So it's become much more accessible since at this point you had to get them from a book. You know? But nonetheless, that was the way it was kind of portrayed. And then when I got into practice and I got with a great mentor, it was really a protocol heavy. And I was kind of like had this like challenge in my brain, like, I've been advised, like, don't just follow the textbook, don't just follow the book, you know, like you got to like think, right? But what I learned in working through the protocols, it gave me tremendous consistency. So like, okay, if I use this protocol for all of my rotator cuff patients and use this protocol for all of my ACL patients, you really start to see like how different people respond to the same stimulus. And then you start to really learn versus if I change my stimulus every time, like one session with one ACL, I would do 1 series of exercises, and then next session, same ACL or same kind of presentation, and I approached it with the difference of exercises, both got better. I don't know if I had anything to do with it or if I should do all the exercises.
Yes.
Or was one better than the other?
Yes.
Or if one got better and one got worse, I also wouldn't have learned anything.
Yes.
Because they're different. But if I treat both of them the same, both people get better, okay, good. The protocol is probably working.
That's like basic science. Right?
One gets better, one doesn't get better. Like, okay, I know it's not the protocol because someone got better. So maybe there's something else going on here. But it allows you to really like grow and learn by following that process. And I think you mentioned it with evaluation a second ago with, you know, identifying if it's a bias situation or what it is, but doing a consistent evaluation. If I have a back person, boom, same tests. all the time. So you can quickly start to associate, okay, if I'm going to do these 10 tests, these are my 10 best tests, they're going to determine, do I have a problem in which plane of motion do I have a problem in? Do I have an acute problem versus a chronic problem? It'll help you differentiate all those things. And then you can really start to see like the differences of people because you have consistent approach.
Yes.
But if you have a varied approach and varied people, it's really, really hard to learn and gain traction. So this idea of a recipe or protocol, I think, is you have to use it with questions, but it's a very good platform to develop skills from. And then eventually you should maybe move away from it, or at least respect what it gives you and respect what it doesn't give you.
Well, I think that moving away is exactly the point of what we'd call bandwidth. The bandwidth tax is described by the authors of Scarcity, phenomenal book written about a decade ago by two psychologists, scientists, and they studied scarcity at a very elite level. And what it would say is that you'll have a bandwidth tax if you have too much pressure on the system. And so what does that mean? If I'm doing, if I'm evaluating you and I'm doing 5 things for your back, and the next person has the same resemblance as you, and I do a different 5 things, my brain's very busy at implementing 5 different things. Now, the third patient, similar presentation, a way different 5 things. The bandwidth is I now have to think about 15 exercises in that 2 hours span and teaching those 15 things. What's nice about protocol, to double down on what you just said, not only do you have better learning from session to session how the person did, but I also have more bandwidth. I have more brain space to actually pay attention to the person.
I love it.
I see the nuances of their movement. I'm paying attention to their face. I'm paying attention to their stress level. Now the session really comes alive. If I get very basic with my drills, because I'm a bit protocol based, I get to pay attention to the human in front of me, and I get all this reception of stress and fear and confidence. I see their breath because I see their ribs flare. I see them holding their breath because they're stressed. And now I can become a coach, because the best coaches in the world are not doing the 30th version of a Bulgarian split squat.
Yes.
They're teaching a squat at an elite level because they understand that they see the person for who they are, rather than I have yet another exercise.
Yeah. That's where the customization comes in. Everybody wants to be treated custom, so they say. I want custom for me. But what they really are saying is they want to make sure that it works for them, right? They don't really want it custom. They want it to make guaranteed results. So I'm going to use a strategy that I know works, which means it'll be somewhat protocol based. It'll be somewhat recipeed, like, hey, this has worked for other people like you, so we're going to use a lot of the same things. But I might have to tweak a few things, which is exactly what you're saying, is that if I can tweak 10, 15, 20% of what I'm going to give you to fit into your lifestyle or to fit your presentation perfectly, that my bandwidth is free enough to make that small adjustment, versus trying to just from a principle standpoint, try to organize an entirely new workout for you. Whereas if I would have taken 80% of what I know works and just modified 2 or 3 things, 20% of it, I can make it custom for you based on proven things that I know are effective.
And I have the bandwidth to pay attention. Because when I'm teaching a quad stretch, I teach the quad stretch like a third of my life. I think I teach some version of an anterior line, front of the thigh, front of the hip stretch.
I don't think I've seen a day of you not teach that.
Yeah, but then what am I doing? And what's interesting to me is how someone might actually flare their rib, or they might up tilt their pelvis, or they put their knee and they kind of pinch it forward, or they do this wonderful hyperextension of their lower back. They do all this weird stuff.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, hey, same drill, but you do this, and you do this, and I'll coach it 10 different times.
Yes.
Because they have different shit going on with them.
Yep.
But they need the same kind of stretch, but a different coaching cue.
But you've learned and acquired the feedback that they're unique. Mm-hmm. You can see those 6 or 8 different variations because you've done the same thing 1,000 times. Mm-hmm. To your point, so I think that's very, very important. That a lot of times in the healthcare field, and certainly in our profession of PT, it's thought negatively to use a protocol or have it be too cookie cutter. And you don't want to be cookie cutter in the way that you just take a sheet and hand someone a sheet and everybody gets the same sheet. That's not what I'm talking about. But in your head, you should have that sheet as to okay, these are the 5 to 10 things that I plan on implementing, and I'm pretty sure these 5 will work, And I think these next 5 would be good, but I'm probably going to narrow that down to two or three. So at the end of the day, I'll get 7 or 8 things that are going to make good sense and be customized for this person, optimized for this person, for the outcome they have.
And then over time, I think as you get better with kinetic linking, you can explain it with less words.
Oh, yeah.
But I think in the beginning, we're all a bit off with our explanation of, why do they need this? So we try, and maybe it sticks, but the person has blind faith, like, oh, I'm just going to trust you. I'm not sure if I understood any of that, but I think I'm going to try. And they probably don't understand it because you probably don't know it elite enough to say it simply.
Yeah. So we found definitely that a blend of these two things, a blend of principle, a blend of protocol, is really, really important to kind of get together at this point where you actually get true learning by the clinician. So they develop these pattern recognitions and these trend recognitions. So when they see it again, it's easily identifiable, and then they can easily customize and modify to then implement to be effective with the person they're working with.
Yeah.
So hope that helps you guys, whether it be in this field or in any other field. And from a teaching standpoint, when you're developing people and working with people, there's no one way. And there's no, hey, everybody, this is the protocol running exactly like this. Humans just don't work like that. So you have to have some combination of principles, and then this is the methodology, this is the steps, this is the sequence, the recipe, if you will, to get there. Yeah. We had that great video we used in our education at one point about the chef and the recipe. It was a French chef.
Oh, yeah. Great.
It was super good. And the concept behind the recipe was that a recipe will never be repeated. It's a guide. And even though you run the same recipe, if the temperature is different of the air, if you're using a different oven or a different stove, if you're using fruit, in this case he was using fruit, he was using an apple or a pear, and it was the ripeness of the fruit would make a massive difference into how long it should be cooked for and how much water was in the fruit, because sometimes if you cooked it too long, it would dry faster if it was already like a dried out fruit compared to some fruit that's more fresh and more moist, more unripe. So lots of variety within the same recipe of cook it in a pan for this long, da-da-da-da-da.
Because we need our identity glued to something, and sometimes it's very disheartening for a younger clinician to just say, oh, you have this dysfunction, let's do these 5 exercises. Because you want to think. You want to prove your value. Mm-hmm. And the value is, can you coach those 5 in an elite way? Or does one need a modification because they're unable to do it? So how to modify, how to make just enough variable, how to coach it, how to program it, how to influence it. That's where high value is. It's not thinking of the next new exercise. And I think that's where the social media craze of what visually looks interesting, so stupid. Yeah. Gosh, that's a real stupid thing. Yeah. I'm gonna take a little thing of Jordan Peterson here. That's just stupid. I'll say it. Like looking for the next new exercise. This is the wrong focus.
Yeah.
And you will not see on Instagram the elite cue to address it because it doesn't look good. It doesn't visually appease the appetite of social media. But in the session, that's what people pay for.
Yeah.
They don't pay to look good in a post. They pay for, oh, I felt that. That was different.
Yeah.
And I think it's also common for a listener to think of like, what do you mean by first principles? What do you mean by principles in general? And thinking of science, I love the book Anatomy Trains. And I love particularly in chapter 2, where Thomas Myers will say, imagine there's simply 3 layers of the body. If you took out everything from the body except for collagen fascia, and then took everything from the body except for the vessels, the blood and lymph vessels, and then did the same thing for the nervous system. You have 3 different layers of the body. You have the fascial structure, you have plumbing, and you have nervous signals, electrical conduits. And I think it's really fascinating to think of that because like probably any principle you think of outside of human psychology is resting on those 3: plumbing, electrical signaling, and fascial structure.
Yeah.
And that's a great way of like thinking like, what's the tissue made up of? What's the science of that? How do the cells change? How do they talk? And that's what we mean by principle-based thinking. How do nerves change? How do cells change? How does structure changes? That's a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, that's how I think. When I see the body, I see it in that light. Like those layers. And like, okay, what's the muscle and fascial tissue doing? What's the plumbing doing? What's the nervous system doing? What's the bone structure doing? What does it allow for? And that's how I learned to put it together. Through a deep dive into like kinetic linking, proper movement, biomechanics, and then of course all of the specific joint kinematics and movement strategies. So on the exercise front, I've always said that I think that there's only 8 exercises, and that's not intended to like super simplify. That is the real thing. Like you've got, for the legs, you have a squat, you have a deadlift, which would be a hinge. You've got a step up, and you've got a lunge. Mm-hmm. So that's a single leg stance would be a step up or a lunge. Split squat stance. So there's 4 things for the lower half. In the upper half, you have horizontal push and pull, vertical push and pull. Mm-hmm. And then I've added the one just from Dan John's that they have to carry something.
Yeah.
So 9 would be a carry, and we carry things in different ways, and that's more of an endurance-based thing. But everything else you see is built off of that platform. Mm-hmm. So it's just some hybrid of it, some customization, some tweak, and which are great. That's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But I think we get mistaken when as a either clinician or a coach of any kind, you see something cool and then you try to apply that cool thing to everybody. Mm-hmm. I think that's where the way people are learning now is the most dangerous. Mm-hmm. If you're not principle based and you haven't been sound in like protocol development where you don't understand how the body adapts, how to load it, how it changes over time, and you don't have a clear plan of how to get there, then bringing in something on the outside as a modification and implementing it is extremely dangerous and I'd say irresponsible. But if you have a plan that you're moving on and you get stuck and you know that, okay, this is what I normally do, but it's not working, so now I need a variation. If you use that idea of like, all right, I need a variation on a hip hinge. I know I need to get this person to hinge better, but the hinges I'm doing aren't effective. Mm-hmm. So I need to find a different way to hinge. Then the creativity and the expression of something unique coming into play makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But if it's just like, hey, that looks cool, let's add it. This person needs a hinge exercise and that one looks just as good as the others. I hate that strategy. Mm-hmm. Go with the most basic, most consistent thing you can until you hit a wall. And if you do, then you bring in that creativity at the point of complication.
I know when these B stance and peg leg stance and one leg's doing this, one leg's doing that type stances for hinges. And that someone made that famous online, like, I don't know, like 2 years ago, whatever it was. And everyone started doing them. And I was still doing my assisted T position. And I started taking over a few patients from other therapists just because they were sick or whatnot. And I would try and I would coach them up on this, some type of like different hinge. And I was unfortunately saddened to watch so many people not do a hinge as defined by a neutral spine, hip bending a lot, knee bending a little bit. And guess what? Your glutes should be working. You should kind of feel it because it's a big muscle group. So you should feel it there. Maybe your back got a little tired. But I saw people look like snot. They kept, flexing their spine and not flexing their hip, yada, yada. And then I teach them a really basic T position, which is all it is a single leg RDL without any weight to it. And they could all do it. And so when I got feedback like, oh, we find this is like a really cool version of it, my thought is like, well, I've taught the T to my 77-year-old mom with a brand new hip. And if I can teach it to an elderly grandma with a new hip, I can teach that mother effer to anyone. Now do this like altered stance where one leg is straight and one leg, like really? Like how difficult does this need to be? So I think when it comes to exercise choice, find the one that has traction. If you did it for 3 minutes straight, what got tired? What burned? What gave way? And then they look half good doing it, and are they going to look better in 2 weeks for it? You got to just use some basic strategy, whether or not that's a good exercise or not.
Yeah, well, that's the principle, right? Did you fatigue the tissue that you were targeting? Mm-hmm. Right? Did you get the end result you were looking for? That's a big one. Not just did I do the exercise because I thought it was a good one. Did it end up actually targeting what you wanted to do? We had the same experience with something the other day where they're like, this is a great exercise, I really liked it. I'm like, okay, great. Did it change what you were intending it to change? Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, I don't know. Like, well, then it wasn't great. Mm-hmm. Until we know that's true, right? Because we don't need a lot of stuff. That's the biggest thing we have to continue to evolve to, as in all fields, but certainly in ours, that a lot more stuff is not necessarily better. Yep. Keep it simple, keep it consistent, learn from the consistencies. And then we talk about this a lot. Try to get people on the freeway. You get people get on the freeway, everybody's moving in the same direction, they're moving well, everything's going great. And if you hit a traffic jam, look for a side road where maybe they didn't make good progress. So then look for a side road, get on the side streets, and then you kind of work the side streets a little bit. But eventually you want to get back on the freeway.
Hey, we're back on track. Good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like sometimes you have to take different paths for people. That's normal. That no one's always on the freeway the whole way. But you got to know where the freeway is and how it works.
And I think when you think of a recipe, you're kind of thinking of a recipe within a day, within a session. But you also could apply a recipe for a journey. That also sounds like a standard protocol. And if you have more of a standard program, a standard recipe over time, then yes, it's like, hey, this pain pattern popped up, or that drill was not doing what I thought it would do. Let's take a detour. Hey, that's back on. I measured your stability strength here. We did this. You move better through here. Let's get back online. Now we're going to go back to a push and a pull, a squat and a hinge and a lunge. So it is. It's like, hey, I got my base. As Dr. Herman will say it, it's the steak and potatoes. That's the steak of the meal. Hey, we got our base, and we might have some detours, and that's where the custom really shines.
Yeah. All right, thanks for listening to KIMEcast. Please comment, give us any kind of feedback you have. If you have your own series of exercises that you love and things you do, share them with us. We'd love to talk about them and interact with you guys. You guys have a great day.